everyone. I'm Maya. Aloha. I work for the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College program. And today I'm going to share some work, some coral bleaching surveys that we completed in 2015 in collaboration with NOAA's Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary and a group called Catlin Seaview. Okay. So I thought I'd start today by opening it up to you guys. And what I'd like to do is, I think one of the best skills that you can develop, I see a couple young people in the room, one of the best skills you can develop as a young scientist is skills in observation. And I think skills in observation also help us to be better stewards of some of our really important natural resources like our coral reefs. So I have this photograph here. And the question I'm posing to you guys is, what do you notice? Maybe some of you guys snorkel, maybe you dive. Do you notice things about this photograph? Yeah.
A lot of bleached coral and a lot of fish.
Okay, you notice bleached coral. And where do you see bleached coral in the photograph?
The back corner, up there, almost everywhere.
Okay. Other observations of the photograph? Do you guys notice anything unusual or notice things that remind you of maybe time you spent underwater?
I don't see fish in there.
Oh, interesting. People are not noticing fish. Yeah. Other observations? Some, but not very many. I think I saw a hand over there. Yeah.
Bubbles in the back.
Bubbles in the back. Yeah. What are they coming from? Yeah. Two divers in the back. Okay. These are great observations. So these are the kinds of things that I think about when I'm underwater too. I think about reefs that I've been to, what's the same, what's different, what's unusual. So we're going to talk a lot about observation today and our reefs here in the Hawaiian Islands. Okay, so obviously from the title, you guys know that we're going to talk about coral bleaching. So I have a second question for the group. What have you heard when you see coral bleaching in the news, or maybe you hear your friends or family talk about this? What are some things that you know about or have heard about from either the media or your friends and family? Coral bleaching. Yeah.
A lot of people assume when coral bleach they're already dead, but they're not quite dead yet.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting point. A lot of people assume that if the corals are bleached, they're already dead, but you're right, they're not quite dead yet. That's a really good way to put it. Other things you guys want to add when you see coral bleaching in the news or when you hear about it? Does it make you feel a certain way? You guys have any feelings associated with these words? Oh, sadness, okay. Other thoughts on how coral bleaching makes you feel? Disappointed, okay. I feel that way too. I feel worried, I feel concerned, sometimes I feel sad. So we're gonna dive into this topic a little bit more today as well. Okay, so I'm gonna start here. Coral reefs are the forests of the sea. So just like trees provide structure and habitat to a lot of different animals, corals do the same thing underwater. So I have these two pictures to kind of give you a comparison of coral reefs and trees and forests. But what I'm trying to get at here is corals are really the backbone of the reef system. They provide habitat, they provide homes for lots of different organisms, fish, octopus, crabs, worms, all sorts of things. Other similarities between forests and coral reefs: corals are really slow growing, the same way trees are really slow growing. And the third thing I want to mention is the same way that forests are really sensitive to impacts from human communities, coral reefs are also really sensitive to some of the changes that are induced by human populations. So the next time you guys go out hiking and you're in a forest and the trees are towering above you and you're like, oh, wow, this is an amazing place to be. I hope when you snorkel or go diving or swimming and you see coral reefs, you get that same sense of awe, because these are really unique habitats. They're very special habitats. So you should have that same feeling of like joy and just awe when you enter these coral reef systems. They're really, really special in a lot of different ways. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit. Corals are slow growing, and I wanted to put their slow growing animals, and we'll dig into that a little bit more today. So we know that massive corals, like this coral on the right, which is a pretty species, they grow at about 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter a year. So that's about this much a year. And for the folks that can't see my fingers, I'm holding my fingers 1 centimeter apart. Branching corals, like this species on the left, grow at about 3.5 centimeters a year. So they grow very, very, very slowly. Oh, the slides advance on their own. Okay, so if we look at a picture like this coral is about 2, maybe 2.5 times as big as the human in the picture. And I just told you how slowly these corals grow. You can imagine that this particular coral colony might be several decades old, right? Might be close to 100 years old, maybe. Oh, they just keep advancing on their own. That's okay. So I'm going to pose this question: what's at risk? So these are some pictures from American Samoa depicting some of the coral bleaching in 2015. So on the far left, that picture is from December of 2014. This shows a healthy coral reef. You can see the corals still have their pigment. They're looking okay. When they visited in February of 2015, you can see that they've lost their pigment. So they've lost the zooxanthellae that normally gives them their color, and they're white. And then the following picture from August 2015 shows me something that would give me a lot of concern. A reef that doesn't look so good. And I think if we looked really closely, we would find that a lot of those coral colonies have indeed died. So, we talked about corals are very slow growing. With bleaching, what's at risk is losing animals that take a really long time to grow, and animals that provide habitat for a lot of other organisms on the coral reef. Okay, 2015 was the third ever global bleaching event that was recorded. So the other global events were in 2010 and in 1998. So last year, not only did we see coral bleaching here in the Hawaiian Islands, we saw bleaching in other parts of the world. So NOAA declared 2015 a global bleaching event. But what does this mean for us? What does this mean for us as people who live here in the Hawaiian Islands and people who use the oceans for recreation, or perhaps for subsistence, or perhaps for cultural uses? What does it mean for us? So we know that with coral bleaching, a number of things can happen. So the consequences can vary from events like this. Bleaching can, in certain circumstances, it makes corals more at risk for getting sick, for getting disease. In certain circumstances, if the conditions are right, corals can recover, and maybe the impacts aren't felt so much. And in certain circumstances, if the conditions are really bad, what can happen is corals die, and we lose those coral colonies that take a really long time to grow. So if you think about losing the habitat, the structure for the reef, there's a lot of other impacts that could potentially happen, right? We might see impacts in fishing. These corals help to protect our shorelines and coastlines from big storms and big waves. You might see impact in that respect. Here in the Hawaiian Islands, ocean recreation, diving, snorkeling, that's a major driver for some of the tourism in our economy here. So we might see impacts for tourism and economy. And then this last point, biodiversity. So again, because the coral provides homes for everything else, all the fish and the invertebrates that live on the reef, we might see some impacts on biodiversity as well. Okay, so by the end of today, you can expect to learn 3 things. Number 1, what is coral bleaching? Number 2, I'm going to share some results from surveys that we completed in 2015 here in the Hawaiian Islands. And the third thing that we're going to learn today as a group is what we can do collectively to help protect the reefs that are right here in our backyard. Okay, so we're going to do a little coral biology 101. And for some of you, this might be review, but it's always good to review. So corals are a really cool animal. They have a special symbiosis with a single-celled algae called zooxanthellae. And the way this symbiosis works, it's an exchange. So what happens is the zooxanthellae provide the coral nutrients like nitrates and phosphates, and in exchange, the single-celled algae provide the coral a lot of its energy. And in fact, we know that over 90% of the energy that's required by the coral animal comes from their symbiotic partners, the zooxanthellae that live inside of them. And I'll also mention that the symbionts is what gives the corals color. So how many of you have been snorkeling or diving? What kinds of colors have you seen on corals? Pink, other colors? Purple, blue, brownish, right? Corals have colors. Okay, so this is a really wonderful cartoon that was created here at the Hanauma Bay Education Program. And what I really like about this cartoon is I think it demonstrates the Goldilocks complex that coral reefs have, right? So coral reefs are super picky in lots of different ways. They require specific temperatures. They require specific water quality to thrive and to do well. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. Coral reefs are like Goldilocks. Okay, so this is what happens when a coral bleaches. Again, when you have a healthy coral, we have the symbiotic algae inside of the tissue. Oh. I'm trying here, so you can see these zooxanthellae. Those are the green dots inside the tissue. In stressful conditions, say in temperatures that are outside of the temperatures that a coral likes to live within, the coral can get stressed. And what happens when the coral gets stressed is the symbiotic algae leave the coral tissue. And when that happens, a coral becomes bleached. So there's still tissue that sits on top of the coral skeleton, but it doesn't have color because the zooxanthellae that normally give it its color and its pigment have left. So here's a great close-up of what it looks like in real life. And what you can notice here is, see all these flower-like structures? Those are the polyps, the coral polyps. And what you see here is there's still tissue here, but no color, right? So what we're seeing is the white coral skeleton underneath the tissue that doesn't have the zooxanthellae, which normally give it its color and its pigment. Okay, so there are several causes for coral bleaching. And I talked a little bit about the Goldilocks complex. Conditions have to be just right for corals to do well. So if there are changes in ocean temperature, if it gets too hot, the coral can get stressed and bleach. If there's too much runoff and pollution, corals can bleach. If the corals get overexposure to sunlight, they can bleach. And lastly, during extreme low tides. So if the corals are exposed from extreme low tides, it can also lead to conditions where the corals get stressed and bleach. Okay, so in 2015, several of us went on a research vessel called the Hawai'i, and we completed coral bleaching surveys. So I'm going to show you guys a quick video to introduce what we did. Let's see. Where did my mouse go? Oh, here we go. Okay.
This year, the Hawaiian Islands experienced mass coral bleaching due to a large warm water event. So we're here to study the coral reefs, to survey which areas are bleached and which areas are experiencing other disease outbreaks. The kind of data that we're collecting are data on species, data on the extent of bleaching and the extent of disease. So the amount of the colony that is experiencing bleaching disease, how bad that bleaching is.
Collecting this kind of data is really important because it can help us answer questions about where bleaching is occurring and which species are being most impacted. And this kind of information helps us make better decisions about how to manage our coral reefs, which are a really important resource here in the Hawaiian Islands.
We did see plenty of bleaching down there on this particular dive throughout almost every species that we surveyed, and also in both small and large islands.
Thanks for joining us on our dive. Check out some more of our pictures and videos on sanctuaries.noaa.gov.
Okay. How do I move to the next slide? Like that. So this is the research vessel that we were on. It's called the Noahi'i Alakai. And we visited 3 islands here in the state of Hawaii. We went to Lanai, Maui, and Hawaii Island to complete bleaching surveys in November of 2015. And I wanted to show this picture to you guys to give you a sense of what we do on these surveys. You might be scratching your heads and say, survey, what does that mean? Well, what it means is we go to specific places and we use a transect belt. You guys might call it a measuring tape. And what we do is we count all of the coral colonies and we decide which species they are, and we take note of whether they show signs of bleaching, how severe the bleaching is, yeah, that's the data that we use to calculate things like prevalence, which shows what the percent of bleach colonies are in a specific area. So you can see we have divers, we record information on underwater paper. This stick here is actually what we use to size the corals. So, you know, if it's a small one, we might compare it to that line. If it's a big one, we might compare it to this line over here. And that's what it looks like to complete a survey underwater. Okay, in addition to collecting really important scientific data, we took pictures using technology developed by Catlin Seaview Survey. So we had this 360 camera with us at all of the survey sites. This picture is actually from Florida, but I wanted to use it to show you guys the camera setup. And so what we did at each of the survey sites was we took 6 photographs on this tripod. And the way the camera works is each of the photographs overlaps a little bit. So you can see there's a wide lens here. See this dome here? And it allows you to take a picture with a really wide angle. And when we take 6 and turn the camera around in a circle, we can go back and stitch those cameras together to make a panoramic shot or a 360 shot. So the photographs that we took on this scientific research cruise, they're actually going to get fed onto websites that will allow people to visit these places virtually from the comfort of their own desktop. So I'll show you guys that kind of towards the end of the talk today. So here's that picture again. So this is the kind of image that you can get from using that particular camera setup. So again, 6 different photographs that get stitched together, and it gives you a 360 shot of a specific place. So this actually, you know, if you were to wrap it around on both ends, it connects, and it's the same as if you stand in place and turn around in a circle. That's the same kind of view that you get using a camera like this. All right, so where do we go? We went to sites here on the island of Lanai, places here in West Maui, and some sites here on Hawaii Island. And here are some of the results. Sadly, we did see bleaching at all of the survey sites that we visited in November of 2015. And for specific species of coral, we saw particularly high prevalences of bleaching. So 2 species of cauliflower coral, and then this is a species, we call it pork chop coral, had particularly high levels of bleaching compared to the other species that we saw. Okay, this map gives you a sense of the average levels of bleaching for all of the coral species combined. So the smaller dots indicate lower levels of bleaching. lower percentages. And the bigger dots indicate higher levels of bleaching, higher prevalence, higher percentages. So you can see here, sites on Lanai, they varied spatially. There were certain sites where we saw very low levels, some sites where we saw higher levels. I'd say West Maui, especially in comparison to Lanai, had much higher levels of bleaching. And then here are the sites from Hawaii Island. So again, you can see it depends on where you go, right? This varies spatially. So certain sites like this site way up in the north, lower levels of bleaching, but sites down here in the south, we saw higher levels comparatively. So again, bleaching at all the sites that we surveyed. Every single site we went to, we saw bleached corals, but depending on where we went, we saw different levels of bleaching. Okay, so I'm gonna do some before-after comparisons. I have some photographs I wanna show you guys. So this was a photograph taken in August of 2015 in Maui. What do you guys notice about this picture? What kinds of colors do you see? Brown, green, maybe a little bit of like purpley blue, but in general, lots of different colors, right? I'm gonna show you the November picture. So here's November of 2015 in the same location, and what do you notice about this photograph? Lots of white, yeah. So like we said before, this is indicative of bleaching. So the tissue is still on these colonies. It hasn't died yet, but certainly it's lost its color and its pigmentation. So just to give you an idea of the before and after contrast, some of it is quite stark. Okay, so this will be the only graph that I show you guys. We're gonna walk through this together in bite-sized pieces. So here along the x-axis, we have the names of different coral species. These are the scientific names of different coral species that occur here in the Hawaiian Islands. And here along the y-axis, we have bleaching prevalence. So again, this is, you can think of it as a percentage. So for each species, what percent of the colonies that we surveyed showed signs of bleaching? So you can see it depended on the species, right? Certain species had much higher prevalences of bleaching, whereas other species had comparatively lower bleaching prevalences. And again, these are those 3 species that I showed you guys earlier, 2 species of cauliflower coral and 1 species that's commonly known as a pork chop coral. Okay, so at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that this was a collaboration with Hawaii Sea Grant and NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries and a group called Catlin Sea View Survey. So earlier I showed you that 360 camera with the tripod. That's technology that was developed by this group, Catlin Sea View Survey. So I wanted to show you guys a quick clip that shows the different technology that this group uses and then how they're planning on using some of the imagery. So we're gonna watch this video together.
Is a critical piece of technology that's been developed for the Catlin Sea View Survey. Now, it's a rather intriguing device. And there are 3 cameras which are perfectly synchronized to take images every 3 seconds as the craft moves along the seascape. Later, these can be stitched into panoramic images like never been seen before. Here is the underwater propelled vehicle that propels it along the reefscape, and the control is exerted here by the diver, in this case Richard Beavers, the director of the project. A Samsung tablet, a mouse, a whole series of gauges, and you're set to go to make kilometre scale measurements of coral reef seascapes. Off you go, Richard.
Okay, so if you guys want to see some of the imagery that they've collected with, the tripod I showed you earlier, or this SB2 camera that you just saw in the video, please visit their website. They have lots of cool photographs that you can check out, and they're doing very cool work all across the world. Oh, I guess I have to click here. Aha! So remember those panoramic photographs I showed you guys earlier? The ones that we made using the tripod camera? Yeah, so those are getting fed onto Google Street View. So you can visit places underwater from your computer. And in fact, Hanauma Bay is one of the places where they've used the tripod camera system to collect these 360 panoramic shots. So you can visit Hanauma Bay right from your computer. And I thought I'd show you guys what that's like. Oh. Tab. Okay, so because it's a 360 camera, you can do really cool things. Like you can move the camera down and up. You can even move side to side. So again, this is the coral reefs right here in Hanauma Bay. And they took multiple shots, so you can even move through the water like this. So if I click, it brings me to a different location, and I can move the camera all the way down, I can move it all the way up, and I can move it side to side. So the images that we collected while completing these coral bleaching surveys, eventually, once they've been processed, they will be featured on different websites, and you can visit places virtually from your desktop. Okay. Back to the slides. All right, I wanted to end with some tips for us as a group collectively, right? We have responsibility as stewards for the things that are here in our backyards and our oceans and our forests. So I wanted to leave you guys with some different things that you can do on an individual level, maybe at a family level, your neighborhood level, to help protect coral reefs. And the very first thing I want to mention is you can educate yourself about coral reefs. So everyone here has already done that. Good job. You can give yourself a pat on the back. You've come, to today's lecture. Perhaps you come every Sunday, but that's a really great step you can take towards helping to protect our reefs, is learning a little bit more about the best available science and just information on reefs in general. Here's some other things you can do. You can reduce the use of lawn and garden chemicals. We talked about runoff and pollution being one of the things that can induce bleaching. Another thing you can do is don't dump household chemicals into storm drains, because those storm drains lead straight to the ocean. So please don't do that. Here's another thing you can do. Choose sustainable seafood. Learn about good reef etiquette and practice it when in the water. Hanauma Bay has an excellent video that shows you some good behavior to have when you snorkel and go diving here. You can volunteer for beach and waterway cleanups. And there are several things you can do to help reduce your carbon footprint. So today we talked about increases in temperature being one of the primary ways that corals get stressed, and we see bleaching in these corals. So reducing our carbon footprint certainly helps to reduce some of the impacts we see from bleaching. So you can drive less. I've been trying to walk more this month. You can use a bicycle if you like to bike. Reduce, reuse, recycle. You can purchase energy efficient appliances and light bulbs. And I like this one too. Print less, download more, use less water. So these are all different ways that you can help to protect some of our coral reefs. And I hope you guys start to do some of these things. Please feel free to tell your family and friends. The more people that know, the better. Okay, so recap. We're going to do a quick recap. So today we learned what is coral bleaching. So you can go home, tell your parents, tell your friends. can be like, hey, guess what? I learned about coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is when, and then I'll leave that to you, fill in the blank, because we learned about that today. We learned about some of the results from surveys that we completed in 2015, and we finish with some things that you can do to help protect coral reefs here in Hawaii. Okay, thank you guys so much. Mahalo.
All right, do we have any questions for Maya?
Yes.
I have a few. My first one is, well, I'll just say all of them.
Okay.
How much does things like us going into the ocean with sunblock and such, like in Hanauma Bay, affect, and like hair products affect coral bleaching? What's the state of coral bleaching in Hanauma Bay? And is there anything, once it starts to bleach, that you can try to bring back
Zooxanthellae?
like, is there any way to undo bleaching?
Is there any way to undo bleaching? Those are great questions. So we'll start with the personal care products, sunscreen.
I know I see reef safe sunscreen, so.
Yeah,
So how bad is it?
that's a great question.
Why
So
doesn't Hanauma Bay ban it? It's really bad.
that's an excellent question. So there's been some recent work looking at sunscreens in particular. And, my expertise is certainly not in personal care products and corals, but my understanding is there's an ingredient inside sunscreens that can be harmful to corals and reduces just their overall health. So I'd be happy to look into what that specific ingredient is. And
Oxybenzone is a specific ingredient, at least one of them, there's several of them that are involved, but oxybenzone is the one that's most frequently listed.
great.
And ReefSafe has oxybenzone, but according to a company-sponsored research project at MOTS last year, MOTS Scientific Research, Marine Research, and Keys, it's bound with something that keeps it from being affecting the coral. Now, what it does to the coral is increase bleaching, but it also causes the floating, what do you call it? Thank you. I can never get that, remember that in my head, to calcify. And so they don't colonize, they don't recruit anyplace.
Great.
There's another piece on that is it affects humans as well, but it's a hormonal surrogate. And humans will start, will show it in their urine within a half hour of being exposed to it. And here in the Hawaiian Islands on Oahu, about 12%, 12 times the amount that was originally, or the kills caused the problem in coral. It's pretty bad.
Great. So I guess that's the ingredient to watch out for, so you can look at what your sunscreen is made out of and make sure that that's not in there. I like to wear rash guards. I get cold easily, so I wear a wetsuit. You can't get burnt through a wetsuit. So, you can use other things to help protect your skin from the sun. But that's a great question about personal care products and the impact that they might have on corals. So you had two other questions, but should we go to other questions, or can I do those two first? Okay, so the second question was,
State of bleaching in Hanauma Bay.
yes. Okay, so I have not conducted bleaching surveys in Hanauma Bay in the last couple years. Mahelani, do you have more information about folks that have done work here? That's a great question. I think it's a reef where we should be completing surveys, but it takes time to go and do this kind of work. So to be determined, but that's a great question. And the last question was about recovery. So corals can recover if the conditions are right for them to recover. So they don't always bleach and die. Sometimes they bleach, and if the temperatures go back down, sometimes they do recover and they gain their zooxanthellae back and they live happy coral lives. So there is a possibility for recovery, but it all depends on the conditions in the water. Other questions? Yes.
Just to answer a little bit on the question about Hanauma. Last time I was snorkeling there, I didn't see went to the shower area where most people go to and purple, and that area is dead.
Mm.
Not aged, just dead. And also, I was wondering, do the coral expel the blue anthelli, or does the blue anthelli go away from the coral?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's work currently being completed to tease that apart, like exactly what the mechanism is for the zooxanthellae to leave the tissue. So I think upcoming work might help us answer that question a little bit better. But that's a great question. Do they get expelled or do they leave the tissue some other way?
That'll be the Ruth Gates lab. So Dr. Ruth Gates at the Hawai'i Institute of Marine Biology, her lab focuses on that type of research. So you can look it up later.
Yes.
One more. Do they have any theories about what caused the 2015, 2010, and the 3 coral die-offs? Major.
The global coral bleaching events?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when ocean temperatures are 1 to 2 degrees higher than the average high temperatures, what tends to happen is corals bleach because, you know, they're like Goldilocks. They like a certain set of temperatures, and if it goes beyond what they're used to, then they get stressed and they start to bleach. So in 2015, 2010, and 1998, what happened was the ocean temperatures were above their thermal thresholds, and it caused bleaching in lots of different places. So NOAA has some really good tools for forecasting bleaching conditions. So you can go to their website and they will show a couple months out whether or not they expect to see bleaching in different places. You can actually sign up for like a notification. So if you're interested in reefs here in the Hawaiian Islands, you can sign up and say, I'd like to receive a bleaching notification for the Hawaiian Islands, and they'll actually email you and say, you know, based on our best scientific models, we do or do not expect bleaching in these months. So they do provide forecasts. Other questions?
Last year, I was, the 1st of October, which was supposed to be the peak according to NOAA, as the reef actually ran a series of surveys throughout the islands, which cover more than the relatively few points that you all cover that the LNR has. I think there are only 17 sites that they regularly monitor, and there were over 170 reports put in at that time of different areas and how much bleaching is occurring, what species.
Yeah, that's a great point.
All citizen scientists putting that information in, so it's another.
Yeah, so, yep, that's a great point that the more folks we can have trained at the community level, the more information we can gather about where coral bleaching is occurring, when is it occurring. So I encourage you guys, if you're interested in this topic, to get trained by Eyes of the Reef. It sounds like we have one of the trainers here in the room, so you can talk to him after the talk if you're interested. So I showed you a subset of the bleaching surveys that was completed by, you know, that 3-pronged collaborative team, but there were certainly other folks from the state and the university that were also completing surveys. So, you know, I think eventually the goal will be to put together different data sets to get a better picture of what was happening throughout the island chain last year. Okay, any other questions?